Hello everyone! After taking a patch break with the Hexarite Architect with Varka, in patch Luna 6 we're going back to Lunar Reactions with Linnea, the one new 5-star releasing on the patch. Lunar Charge and Lunar Bloom both have their respective 5-star supports in the live game, but lunar-crystallize doesn't. So Linnea is looking to fulfill this currently empty role for lunar-crystallize teams. To see how strong she currently looks, let's go over Linnea's initial beta kit. But as always, it's still early in the beta, so remember that her kit is very subject to change. Nod-krai has a ton of hype pullable characters in the roster, so it's difficult to pull everything you want, as not everyone has the luxury to spend money on the game. But for those of you that do have this luxury, why not save some money while you're at it? And you can do this easily with the sponsor of this video, LD Shop. LD Shop works with suppliers who partner directly with HOYOVERSE to be able to provide in-game items for Genshin safely, reliably, and at a discounted price, allowing you to save up to 30% off your purchases. And all you have to do is select what you want to buy, whether it's Genesis crystals including the first time top-up bonus or a Welkin, enter your server and UID or friends info if you want to give a gift, and in just a few minutes, whatever you purchase will be received in game. Quick, simple, and easy. And if you register using my link, which will be in the description and pinned comment below, you'll receive a 15% and 5% off coupon, which can save you a maximum of $30, giving you even more discounts. On top of that, if you spend over $80 in a month using LD Shop, you'll earn a free Welkin as well. So if you were thinking about or were planning to spend on Genshin already, save some money while you're at it by using LD Shop. Linnea is a 5-star Geo Bow user who ascends with crit rate. She is a 5-star support for lunar-crystallize, so she counts for Ascended Gleam and will enable a team to trigger the reaction with her moon sign passive, as well as buff its base damage by up to 14% if she has at least 2000 defense. She also has another buff scaling with her defense in her A4 passive by just existing in the party. If the active character is a moon sign character, Linnea will give them EM based on 5% of her defense. If the active character isn't a moon sign character, she gives herself the EM buff instead to increase her own damage. Linnea's kit is fairly straightforward. Her elemental skill summons her pet named Lumi, who deals off-field geo damage in 2 different ways depending on how you use Linnea's skill. If you tap the skill once, Lumi gets summoned and will attack an enemy, dealing 2 hits of AoE geo damage around every 2 seconds. But if there are moondrifts on the field from triggering lunar-crystallize, then Lumi will occasionally perform an AoE attack that does direct lunar-crystallize damage instead. Based on current beta footage with the moondrifts, Lumi will do a lunar-crystallize attack, then regular geo attacks again, then back to the lunar hit, repeating the cycle as long as moondrifts are nearby, resulting in one off-field lunar-crystallize hit about every 6 seconds. Now if you repeatedly tap Linnea's skill instead, Lumi will be summoned and fed, get really big, then do one big instance of lunar-crystallize damage. Afterwards, Lumi will still deal the 2 hits of normal geo damage periodically, but instead of about every 2 seconds, the attacks will only happen around every 5.4 seconds instead. So tap skill gives more consistent off-field damage, while continuous tap skill mainly gives a nuke of damage with a little off-field presence. At the current moment, the tap skill and nuke skill look similar for team damage. The nuke skill is probably better practically because you can front load damage, but tap skill may synergize better for different teams. Also, while Lumi is on the field in whichever form, Lumi will shred nearby opponents' geo res by 15%, and if the team has Ascended Gleam, you'll get an additional 15% geo res shred. Lastly, Linnea's burst heals the entire party, scaling with her defense, and then gives additional healing for the active character every second for 12 seconds. If Lumi isn't on the field, Linnea's burst will summon Lumi in the tap skill form. If Lumi was already on the field, the burst will reset Lumi's active duration without changing the form. And that's Linnea's base kit in a nutshell, pretty simple. To quickly go over her constellations, C1 gives Linnea cool buffs after using her skill or when triggering Moondrift Harmony, which is when the damage from lunar crystallized moondrifts occur after triggering 3 lunar crystallized reactions, and these quills can be consumed to buff her nuke skill or the party's lunar crystallized damage. C2 gives Hydro and Geo characters in the party 40% crit damage after triggering Moondrift Harmony. Linnea's nuke skill also gains 150% crit damage, and with Ascended Gleam, whenever Lumi does a lunar crystallized attack in either form, C2 will trigger an additional Moondrift Harmony for more damage. C3 is 3 skill town levels, C4 gives Linnea and the active character 25% defense after triggering Moondrift Harmony, C5 is 3 burst town levels, and lastly C6 basically enhances her C1 cool buffs for increased buffing capabilities. With Ascending Gleam, C6 also elevates the team's lunar crystallized damage by 25%. Overall, her constellations look fine for a support. C1 seems to be on the weaker side, but C2 and C6 look very strong at the moment. In terms of potential build options, Linnea's signature has a crit damage substat, and the unique passive gives 40% damage bonus to regular geo damage and lunar crystallize damage for Linnea after she uses her skill. And if there are moondrifts on the field, the team will get 20% damage bonus to regular geo damage and lunar crystallize damage. A solid signature that increases Linnea's personal damage and provides some team buffs. Now because Linnea is defense scaling, deals lunar damage, and doesn't always need ER since her burst is just healing, she doesn't have many alternative choices that maximize her damage. If you have Aqua Simulacra or Skyward Harp, they are two usable 5-star statistics because of the crit. The nod-krai craftable Snare Hook is okay since the unique passive gives EM which buffs lunar damage, however the ER is only useful if you need Linnea's healing every rotation. But the best non-5-star option for damage will be the 3-star weapon Slingshot, just because of the substat that gives a lot of crit rate, which buffs Linnea's regular geo damage and direct lunar crystallize damage. For artifacts, 4-piece Morning Star is one option because Linnea does off-field lunar damage with her tap skill, and since the buff lingers for 3 seconds while she's on field, there is a small window of time for it to buff the nuke version of her skill as well. However, 4-piece Husk currently looks to perform very similarly to Morning Star and can actually be her best set with Constellations or with just better substats because of all the defense that it gives. Other than that, she can use 4-piece Welkin Moon Serenade if needed, but ideally someone else holds it in a lunar team. For main stats, she's using Defense Hourglass, Defense Goblet, and then Crit or Defense Circlet, with Defense Circlet getting better with Constellations. Substats you want to aim for are Crit, Defense, and EM. Since Linnea's burst only heals, she doesn't necessarily need to use it all the time, so energy recharge isn't mandatory. But if you do need the healing, for example in Farina teams or better Harbinger of Dawn uptime for your main DPS, then you'll need some ER to burst every rotation. Finally, Linnea's potential best teams. As a lunar crystallized sub-DPS and support, her biggest value will be with the lunar crystallized DPS, Zibai. Zibai's current standard team is with Columbina or Ino if you don't have her, Eatlua, and a final support which have a variety of options. To simplify this visualization, I'll settle with C6 Goro because he was one of the best choices for damage and has interruption resistance and a little bit of healing. Linnea replaces one of the Geo supports for a significant upgrade in terms of damage for Zibai teams. If you have C6 Goro but not C6 Eatlua, Linnea should replace Eatlua. If you do have C6 Eatlua, Linnea should replace Goro for the most damage. You can still use C6 Goro though since he does give interruption resistance which is valuable. If you have C2 Shilonen, she can be used as well. These teams look incredibly strong in terms of damage, calcing with some of the highest DPS numbers yet because Linnea provides strong buffs for Zibai and Columbina and has personal damage. Even if you're missing Constellations or you're using Ino, the Zibai teams with Linnea still look very good. Other than supporting Zibai, Linnea works well with Columbina to support other Geo DPSs. For instance, Navia, Noelle, or Ito can be supported by the Linnea-Columbina duo with Eatlua, Goro, or Farina as the final support. And because of the support's personal damage, these teams look pretty good considering the Geo DPSs are much older characters. Linnea can still work fine as a support for these Geo DPSs without Columbina, forming a team that is similar to a Farina Shilonen comp but using Linnea instead. But of course they are worse than the ones with Columbina, especially if you don't have Ascended Gleam, which results in less Geo res shred. The Linnea-Columbina duo can theoretically work with non-Geo characters as well. For instance, you can have the duo alongside another support like Farina or Shilonen and play yet another Nivulet wheelchair team. I wouldn't be surprised if a Linnea, Columbina, and Inefa trio is strong enough to deal solid off-field damage for anyone in the final slot. And since Linnea does give the on-fielder an EM buff if they're a moon sign character, she could play as a support for Flint and Nefer. Likely worse than Sucrose, but she does have team healing. However, since Linnea's own damage synergizes greatly with supports like Eatlua and Goro, and her kit provides Geo Res Shred, her main value will be for Geo on-fielders. That's everything on Linnea as of now. Linnea looks like an incredibly powerful 5-star lunar crystallized support. She has good personal damage with both versions of her skill, either the consistent off-field damage version with tap skill or nuke with repeated tap skill, has Geo Res Shred, gives EM if the on-fielder is a moonside character, buffs lunar crystallized damage with her passive, and can heal the team if needed with her burst. With Columbina, she can theoretically work as a sub-DPS duo for a variety of characters as a wheelchair, however her main strength is supporting Geo DPSs. Characters like Navia, Noelle, and Ito are getting some good buffs with Linnea, with some calcs having their Linnea Columbina teams reaching over 100k DPS with KQM standard, which is pretty good considering they are older release DPSs. But of course, Linnea shines the most when she supports Zibai, the lunar crystallized DPS who takes full advantage of her buffs. Zibai is already a top tier DPS currently without Linnea being mainly limited by Eatlua constellation availability, but with Linnea, her teams are getting around a 20% buff in damage. In terms of her team DPS based on early calcs using KQM standard, many theories 3 characters have her top teams with C6 Itlua doing 160 to 170k DPS, some of the highest numbers we've seen with this standard yet, being on par or surpassing very optimized Malwika and Nefer team calcs. And while many likely don't have C6 Itlua, even with low Constellation Itlua or other support alternatives like C6 Goro, the Zibai teams with Linnea are still top tier in terms of DPS, and on top of that, Linnea is a healer. I don't want to overhype Linnea and Zibai too much though, as there are some caveats to her strength. First, while she's a healer, if you use Itlua in a Zibai team, the team doesn't have extra interruption resistance that Zibai ideally wants while on fielding, resulting in some trade-off in terms of gameplay comfort. Second, Zibai team DPS calcs currently don't use Linnea's burst for healing because it's never optimal for damage. In practice though, you will likely sometimes use it, which will decrease the on-paper damage. And third, the actual DPS number, as always, doesn't really matter in the context of Genshin's endgame. For instance, if Zibai is against a boss she's bad against, her best teams calcing at 170k DPS isn't really relevant at all. Linnea is designed specifically so that Zibai can be the best DPS against the Radiant Moon Gecko, who will be in the Stygian lineup on her patch. Despite all of this though, I can't deny that Linnea increasing Zibai's team damage isn't power creep, because it is. Zibai arguably didn't need any buffs because she was top tier already, but she's still looking to get an upscale that further increases the game's damage ceiling, a pattern that is likely to continue as we head into Shnez Naya. But of course, we're still early in the beta, so we'll see if Linnea's current power level remains the same or changes in the upcoming weeks. I hope this initial overview and analysis on Linnea's beta kit was helpful to you all. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment, like the video, or sub to the channel if you enjoyed, and with that, I hope you all have a wonderful day.